The government hired me to erase a forest no one remembers. It started as a simple operation: cut down some trees, destroy any trace of a location, and move on. No questions asked. That's how these classified cleanup contracts usually worked. But this one was different. The forest didn't exist on any satellite maps. The coordinates led to a blank stretch of green wilderness in northern Montana. No roads, no settlements, no records. And yet, when the team arrived, the forest was already waiting for them. He would later swear that the trees were older than the soil itself, and that something in there had been waiting to be forgotten. He was a contractor, name withheld from every record except one, a demolition specialist, 38 years old, ex-military, hired under a temporary government project known only as Operation Ashfall. Officially, the job was environmental reclamation. Clear an area, restore soil, and prepare for construction. But the file was too thin. 2 pages, no signatures, no contact number, just coordinates and a date. He didn't question it. The pay was 6 figures for 2 weeks of work. And that was enough. They flew in on a black helicopter just before dawn. 6 men total, 2 engineers, a communications officer, a surveyor, and a government observer who never gave his name. When they touched down, the first thing they noticed was the silence. No birds, no insects, no wind, just an endless sprawl of dark pine, stretching so far that the horizon seemed to bend around it. He stepped out first, boots sinking slightly into damp moss. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of wet bark and iron. Something about the color of the forest was wrong. The greens were too deep, almost black, like the trees had been scorched from the inside, but still kept growing. They set up camp near the tree line and began their survey. According to satellite data, this region should have been logged 50 years ago. There should have been roads, old stumps, maybe even remnants of fire trails. But there was nothing. No human trace. When they activated the GPS scanner, it flickered, then froze. Coordinates looped in place, repeating the same 3 digits over and over. They reset it 3 times, the same result. The government observer said nothing. He simply noted the malfunction and told them to continue. By midday, the crew started marking trees for removal. They drove metal stakes into the ground, but the soil was strange, soft on the surface, but hard as concrete beneath. Every time the stake hit deep earth, a hollow thud echoed underfoot, like something empty was down there. That night, the first man went missing. The communications officer. He'd stepped outside the perimeter to relieve himself and never came back. They searched for 2 hours, shouting his name, sweeping the area with thermal goggles. Nothing. No heat signatures, no movement. Just trees. Perfectly still. Perfectly silent. Trees. The observer ordered the team to stand down. He said, "Don't go further than the perimeter." His tone wasn't commanding, it was pleading. When dawn came, the missing man's radio crackled to life. Static, then a whisper. "Don't let them see your eyes." They triangulated the signal. It came from inside the forest. The observer confiscated the radio and smashed it under his boot. He told them the mission was continuing as planned. By the second day, the trees had begun to change. When they cut into the first trunk, black liquid seeped from the wound, thick, slow, like oil mixed with blood. The smell was unbearable. Metallic, chemical, ancient. One of the engineers wiped his blade on a rag, and it left behind a pattern, something like veins or roots, etched into the metal itself. The observer finally explained what they were doing. "This place isn't supposed to exist," he said. "It was erased from all records in 1972 after an event we still can't categorize. We're here to finish the job." He didn't elaborate on what event meant. But that night, the ground began to move. It started as a vibration, faint, rhythmic, like a heartbeat pulsing through the soil. Then the sound grew louder, echoing through the trees like something enormous breathing beneath them. They turned on the floodlights, and that's when they saw it. The forest was shifting. Not the wind. The trees themselves were moving. Slightly, almost imperceptibly, their trunks twisting just a few degrees at a time. Turning toward the camp, each one angled differently, but always facing the people. He thought it was an illusion until he noticed the moss beneath his boots was gone, replaced by something else, something fibrous. It wasn't moss. It was flesh. Thin layers of tissue spread across the ground, pulsating faintly under the light. When they stepped back, it peeled away like skin. The next morning, one of the engineers tried to leave. He took the truck, followed the compass due west. He drove for 4 hours straight before realizing the fuel gauge hadn't moved. When he finally stopped, he was back at the same camp. The forest had looped on itself. They tested it again with a drone. The footage showed the drone flying in a straight line for 6 kilometers, then glitching, flickering, before returning to the exact same coordinates it had started from. The forest wasn't a location. It was a construct, a living perimeter. That night, something began calling to them, voices from the tree line, not words exactly, more like echoes of speech, distorted and layered, as if dozens of people were whispering the same sentence a second apart. They sounded familiar, voices of people they knew. When the surveyor stepped closer, one of the trees split open. The bark peeled away like wet paper, revealing something beneath, not wood, but bone, human ribs fused with the trunk, a skull embedded in the center, its mouth open, its eyes still wet. He stumbled back, screaming. The observer didn't move. He only muttered one thing under his breath. It's still feeding. On the 4th day, the air turned colder. Their watches stopped working. The sun refused to rise fully. A permanent twilight cast over the entire forest. They couldn't tell time anymore, couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every sound in the distance began to mimic their own. When one of them coughed, a second cough echoed from the woods, a perfect imitation. When they whispered, the forest whispered back. And when the demolition expert, the one who told this story, tried to burn one of the trees, the flame turned black. It spread fast, but instead of consuming the wood, it crawled backward, into the torch, up his arm, and then disappeared. After that, his skin never felt warm again. The observer finally told them what had happened in 1972. A research team had been stationed there, 20 men and women studying something under the ground. They'd found an organic structure buried deep beneath the roots, a network of hollow tunnels lined with biological material, like veins stretching for miles. The report called it an inverted vascular system. They believed the forest had grown around it, feeding off it, or perhaps protecting it. But the deeper they dug, the less they remembered who they were. Names disappeared from logs, photos degraded. The people began to vanish from official records one by one, until the government sealed the entire region and burned the archives. And now, 50 years later, someone had decided to finish what they started. Operation Ashfall wasn't about cutting down trees. It was about killing something that couldn't die. By the 5th night, the creature revealed itself. It didn't have a shape. Not at first. It moved between the trunks like smoke, like liquid shadow. Every time the floodlights flickered, it appeared closer. They tried to run, but their footsteps echoed too loudly. It was following the sound. He remembered dropping his axe, covering his mouth, trying not to breathe. The creature's form began to solidify. Tall, branch-like limbs, a torso made of roots and bone. Its face was a mask of stretched skin, with eyes that glowed faintly through the thin layer of bark. It moved without sound, and when it stopped, the forest stopped with it. The trees tilted slightly toward its body, as if waiting for orders. He realized then that it was the forest. Every trunk, every branch, every root, connected to a single organism, a single consciousness spread across the soil. And it was angry. The creature reached for the nearest man, the surveyor, and pulled him into the ground as if the earth had turned to water. His scream lasted only a second before the soil closed over him. Then the vibrations started again, louder this time. The forest pulsed in rhythm. The roots shifted beneath their feet, snaring their boots, dragging equipment into the mud. He ran toward the helicopter. The others followed. But the observer didn't move. He stood there, staring at the creature, whispering something in another language. When the creature's gaze turned to him, he smiled, and the trees impaled him through the chest. The branches lifted his body like a flag, and then slowly pulled him apart. The helicopter's engine started, but the moment they lifted off, the compass began to spin uncontrollably. The sky was dark, swirling, clouds forming symbols, twisting patterns that looked like veins spreading through the atmosphere. He thought they were escaping, until he looked down. The forest stretched endlessly below them. No matter how far they flew, the trees never ended. They flew until the fuel gauge hit zero, and still, the trees kept going. When he woke, he was alone. The helicopter was half buried in moss, its metal rusted as if decades had passed. There were no bodies, no footprints, no sound, only the forest, and a low hum vibrating through the air. He wandered for hours, trying to find the edge, but every direction led back to the same clearing. He found the black box recorder still intact. He played it. Static. Then voices. Whispers layered on whispers, overlapping endlessly. He heard his own name, then a single phrase repeated over and over. Erase the record. Erase the witness. Erase the memory. He dropped the recorder and ran. But the more he ran, the more he realized the forest wasn't moving around him. It was moving with him. Every step he took, the trees shifted slightly closer, closing in like ribs protecting a heart. He could hear them breathing. By the time he reached what looked like the tree line, the world simply folded in on itself, like pages closing in a book. And then, nothing. When he woke again, he was in a hospital bed. No ID tag, no visitors, no windows. A doctor entered, no name badge, no insignia, and said, "You were found wandering near Helena. You've been missing for 12 years. He didn't speak. He couldn't. His throat was raw, his eyes bloodshot. When they handed him his personal effects, the only thing inside the bag was a piece of bark. Not wood, but something like hardened skin. Under a microscope, it pulsed faintly. The lab called it an unidentified organic compound. He didn't tell them that it had come from under his fingernails. Weeks later, after discharge, he tried to find the coordinates again, but every map showed a different terrain. The region north of Helena was now a flat plateau. No forest, no record of one. He searched old archives, geological surveys, military logs. Nothing. Even the name Operation Ashfall was gone. It was as if the forest had never existed. But sometimes when he closed his eyes, he could still hear it. That slow, steady hum. And sometimes in the dark, he felt the ground breathing beneath his feet. Last month, a journalist contacted him, said she'd found a classified satellite photo, dated 1972, showing a circular shadow in northern Montana, roughly 2 miles wide. But the same coordinates today showed nothing but grassland. When she asked if he wanted to see it, he said no. 2 days later, she went missing. Her last message to him was a single sentence. They planted it again. He deleted the message, but not before saving the coordinates. He said he wouldn't go back. He promised himself that. But last week, he packed a bag, rented a truck, and started driving north. No one's heard from him since. And if you ever find yourself in Montana, in a place that doesn't appear on any map, and the air starts to hum, don't look at the trees, because they might already be looking at you.